episode 19 of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths. I'm Jon Cripwell, and if you've been listening for a while, you'll know that we recently introduced a new format. So just a reminder, from now on, you'll get 2 episodes each week because you can never have enough maths. And that will consist of a guest interview every Tuesday and the After Maths every Friday. See what we did there with the name. Where Becky and I will reflect on the week's conversation, pick out key takeaways from the interview that week, and dig into, of course, the maths of life, sharing some of the most interesting research and classroom ideas we've come across along the way. Last week's guest was the brilliant Georgina Durant, one of my colleagues here at Twinkle, who talks about supporting pupils with SEND, particularly in maths. And it was a conversation that was full of great ideas and practical things that you can apply in your classroom to support all the pupils that you teach. So if you missed that episode, go back and give it a listen. And then in Friday's After Maths episode, we went on a bit of a historical bent again with the maths of life, this time exploring the origins of centiles when it comes to measuring babies and how they're still used in clinics today. Becky also took us on a little bit of her own historical journey in her Etymology segment, where we discussed how knowing the root meaning of words can really help us to understand and apply them correctly when it comes to maths vocabulary. So check that out too. If you haven't already, just a reminder to make sure that you are subscribed so you never miss either half of the week, the deep dive interview on a Tuesday, or the lighter Friday reflections. And while you're at it, we would love to hear from you. We've been having people getting in touch recently, and it's been brilliant to include you in the show on a Friday. So please tell us about the memorable maths moments from your classroom or your life, the lessons that went brilliantly, and especially the ones that didn't go quite to plan. You can get in touch by emailing primarymathspodcast@twinkle.co.uk. That's Twinkle without an E, of course. Or you can send us a DM on Instagram or on LinkedIn, Threads, X, etc. Some of your stories may well make it into a future episode. Today's episode continues our theme of connection, this time between maths and science. We talk about the power of curiosity, how to spot and strengthen the natural links between the two subjects, and why a little bit of colour and experimentation can make maths come alive for pupils. Let's get into it. At school, science and maths are seen as separate subjects, but in reality, we know that they're deeply connected, from measuring and data collection to spotting patterns and testing ideas. My guest today knows that better than most, with a varied background in STEM, to say the least, ranging from veterinary and general practice to orthopedics. She eventually discovered her passion for education and has held various roles as a primary, secondary, post-16 and alternative provision practitioner, specialising in science and chemistry. She's now a passionate advocate for making STEM, or rather STEAM, accessible, creative and hands-on. She's a multi-award-winning educator, a published author, and the driving force behind a whole host of practical activities designed to bring science to life for children in schools and at home. My guest today is Leonie Briggs, and I'm delighted to have her on the show. Welcome, Leonie.
Oh, thank you so much for that very kind introduction.
No. It's all factual and an amazing CV, which we'll get onto in just a moment, if that's okay. But it's great to have you on the show. We always start with a little travel back in time to see what maths was like for you at primary and secondary. Was it a subject that you enjoyed?
Oh, yeah. I've always loved learning, and I think I've always been perhaps incredibly lucky with the teachers that I ended up in the classrooms of, to have such positive learning experience. You know, I'm even married to somebody that I went to school with. I met my husband when we were 11 on induction day at secondary school. So you never know who you sat next to. And, you know, nearly 25 years later, here we are, because we've been together since we were 18. So yeah, I had a really, really positive school experience. I think I owe joyous maths, if I'm honest, to my secondary school maths science teacher, an amazing man called Mr. Educator at Ecclesfield School in Sheffield. he made maths really creative and enjoyable and broke down barriers to learning. He was a big football fan. He was from Norwich originally. We used to sit in football league tables. We're all loaded in maths. We used to have fun, learn about probability by having screwed up piece of paper and throwing them into the bin and seeing how many times we could get it into the bin. We even played darts as part of
Wow.
our maths lesson. I was at school in the 90s, so we seemed to be allowed to do that then.
I was going to say, I'd love to see the risk assessment for that one, but yeah.
I'm still here. So to me, I've always loved learning, and it's something that I've continued with into my adult life. I thoroughly enjoy finding out new things and looking at new ways of teaching and experimenting. So yeah, I think I was incredibly lucky that I went to school with a fantastic group of people, and I had some absolutely amazing teachers.
Yeah, it's a great point that teachers have, the capacity to really make learning accessible, don't they? Or potentially to close it off, sadly, a little bit as well. So having the benefit of a passionate teacher who clearly really wanted to make maths real and, accessible is fantastic. So I mentioned in the introduction, you've had not necessarily a straightforward linear approach. It wasn't do your A levels, do a B.Ed, move into teaching. It sounds like you had a slightly varied journey to this point.
I
Could you
did.
go over that for me a little bit?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, that's what, really brought maths to life and helped me in my teaching, because I thought I'd got real practical ways that I'd use maths in my everyday life. So yeah, I started my professional career in veterinary practice. Oh gosh, your maths had to be correct in a vet's. Believe me, when it was 2 a.m. and you were in an orthopedic referral hospital, calculating intravenous fluid lines, radiography. It wasn't even digital, and I'm not that old. Back then, we used to do all the calculations to make sure that the radiographs, the X-rays, came out correctly. Even from calculating, for pots and bandaging, to doing staff rotas, to making sure that even the kennel plan was correct. Oh, maths was so influential in my career, and it was obviously very, very practical in using that
Yeah.
maths. So yeah, I started life in the veterinary world from general practice, then went through to orthopedics, so spinal surgery,
Wow.
broken bones, things like that.
Oh
And then
no,
moved.
that stuff goes right through me,
Oh,
Leonie. I
sorry,
can't.
we'll
Yeah.
bypass past that. Then we do rehabilitation again, layers of maths. It was hard. It was easier to look after an Olympic-sized swimming pool in terms of the chemical calculations than the tiny little hydrotherapy
Yeah.
pools that we'd use for dogs. So yeah, at one point I honestly used to swim dogs for a living as well, to get them back onto the feet. And I then went on to train veterinary nurses, and I used to quality assure the veterinary nursing award. So from that, I basically used to decide, who could be a clinical coach, who could train veterinary nurses, if you passed your veterinary nurse qualifications, who could be a training practice. And we used to do that across the whole of the country. But secretly, I always wanted to be a teacher. I was that child who had a little display in the bedroom, like of books and posters and things
Yeah.
like that. I fondly remember a Peter Rabbit one that I'd created. So when I had my daughter, my first child, perhaps through madness, I don't quite know what people would think, I decided that I'd do my PGCE. So I'd started, yeah, I
If
started
you're going to
with,
have one major life change and all that stress, you might as well add in another. Did you move house as well at the same time? I mean, that would have just,
she was one. So there we go.
Right, okay. Yeah, yeah.
We went for it. But yeah, so I'd worked for a short time in alternative provision and as a teaching assistant. And obviously having a first class honours science based degree was obviously very, very desirable as well, to get people into teaching. So I went into teaching, and yeah, very luckily I've worked in primary, secondary, post 16, and I love all STEM and STEAM subjects, to be honest, to be really practical, really hands on, and really, really memorable. I came to be director of AmazeLab, I'll be honest, through complete chance. During lockdown, I was really passionate about young people not missing out on practical skills.
Yeah.
So I started broadcasting from my dining room in Barnsley in South Yorkshire. And I'll be honest, it then just snowballed from there. And AmazeLab was 5 this year. So, yeah, that's
That's
been a bit of
incredible.
a whistle
And
stop too.
I would love to talk to you a bit more about that in a few moments if we can, because I think some of the work that you're doing is brilliant, and exciting as well. Do you miss the veterinary side of things at all? Is it
I
something you'd?
still kind of get roped into that a bit. It's one of those where sometimes, well, obviously people still phone me for advice. And when schools discover that I am from a veterinary background, I'm then sometimes going in to run an animal workshop. So I don't think it ever
No.
quite leaves you. And I used to use it so much when I was a classroom teacher. In a way, I don't know if I bored the kids, but when you have those young people go, oh, but miss, when are we using this? Well, every
Yeah.
single day I used to make blood smears, do urine samples. I used to use a microscope. And I think they were a bit like, oh gosh, wish we'd never asked. It was really nice because I could relate that learning to real world experience of when I had actually used those skills out in.
Yeah. It's great to have that experience to draw on, I think, isn't it? You've recently come to write a book published by Crown, called "Make Your Own Rainbow: A Colourful Approach to All Things STEAM." I was very kindly sent a copy of the book, and I've read it. It's excellent. It's very practical. It's not sort of a theory sort of book, although there's plenty of scientific theory in there and things. But and it explains why all the investigations work and things. But it is very practical, and lots of things that you can get hands on and do, which I love. But also, can we just clarify this idea of STEAM, because some people might not have heard of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. What's the A in STEAM, Leonie?
So the A is for the arts. So we aim to use creativity to break down barriers to learning. So that's why we are a STEAM educational resource company.
Fantastic. And some people might think the arts and the sciences are quite different skill sets and things, but I think there's definitely an argument to be made to integrate the two together.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll give you a really quick example of a project that I'm
Yeah,
working.
please do.
I'm currently working on a project with the amazing team at Barnsley Civic, which is a theatre based in Barnsley. And we are working with 3 separate schools, and we're doing co-created workshops to then teach to other young people. And these are fantastic workshops because we're diving behind the scenes of the theatre, and we're really looking at the technical side. So we're actually doing some light and sound engineering. So to me, that project beautifully demonstrates the link and why we need that A into STEM.
Absolutely. Yeah, that sounds great. And as somebody who, used to be involved in amateur theatre and stuff, I can completely see that. And I think that knowledge of the STEM side of the STEAM, it's a great link. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about how this book came about then? Again, it's called Make Your Own Rainbow. So maybe you can start with that.
Yeah, so it's about using colour to really hook people into STEM and STEAM subjects. So again, it was originally inspired by the work that we did during lockdown, during the pandemic, where it basically all started with an exploding rainbow. I'm also a STEM ambassador. So a STEM ambassador is somebody who donates a proportion of their time to try and inspire young people into STEM subjects. So I ended up being selected as the STEM ambassador to broadcast to the entire nation, which was odd because as a teacher, I didn't really enjoy observations. I thought they were terrifying. And then the next thing I knew, I was now broadcasting to the entire nation. And so I was tasked with writing a practical. So I wanted it to be that you could grab anything out of the cupboard. Everybody could get involved. But it was something that was enjoyable and had loads of learning in it. So we ended up doing our little mini exploding rainbows experiment. And that's when I was then approached, obviously not just from one experiment, but from the work we did during the pandemic, by Crown House. Now, it is incredibly hard to write a book. I'm never, ever going to deny that. It was one of those really joyous moments of, oh, wow, they've asked me to write a book. This is amazing. To then sitting down going, wow, I've now actually got to write a book. That was quite an interesting task. You're right. The bit where we worked with Jane, the absolutely amazing photographer, and our mini AmazeLab crew was just wonderful when we did all the photos. So again, I really believe in the importance that there's not just me writing these resources or the AmazeLab team. It's really important that we're working with the young people who are going to do them. So at the moment, our mini AmazeLab crew range from being 6 years of age to 14, and they help us write and test resources. So a small group of them were involved in the experiments for the book. So again, it's a real, as you've touched on, it's a real no barriers to learning book. I've got my being a mum hat on, I've got my being a teacher hat on, and the idea is that you can just pick it up and you can do these activities. There's 40 different activities in there, but they're all simple, low cost, safe, but really effective and fun. But it's not, a big stress of, oh, what have I got to get? What have I got to order? The idea is that it is all equipment that you will have in, like, your classroom store cupboard or in your kitchen or in your
Yeah.
garage. You can just go and grab things, but it is all curriculum linked as well. So again, we've tried to remove that stress. So say, you're coming up to a topic and you think, I don't really know what to do for that. We've tried to make it a really simple, low cost, safe, but effective, where you open up that book and you're like, great, I can do
Yeah,
that. Engaging.
I think it's a great resource, whether got it in your classroom or at home. I think it's a great resource to be able to explore science and maths in a really hands-on, colourful way as well. And honestly, if you do see the book, you'll spot it on the shelf because it is a rainbow, essentially, in terms of colour. It's beautifully put together. Just getting back to the maths for a moment, Leonie, do you think that the way we've touched on this briefly before we started recording, I think my opinion is that the national curriculum, when it was introduced in its current form, sort of artificially separated the science and maths. They feel like very discrete subjects, but as I mentioned in the introduction, they are clearly closely connected, and lots of skills, sort of bridge the divide between the two. How do you think we can start reintegrating them? If you are, as a maths lead, I was often asked to, can you show me evidence of maths being used across the curriculum? And I think and go, okay, well, my first port of call is going to be science, but how can we make sure that maths is integrated into science and science is integrated into maths when you've got them as quite discrete subjects, do you think?
Oh, to me, it's involved in everything. I can even give an example of, my own son. My own son is a drummer in a band. He's only 8, but it's like the school rock band. And I was really proud of him when he actually came home about 2 weeks ago. I said, Mummy, do you know that I can't drum without maths? And I was like, wow, no, show me on your drum kit. And I was like, he said, because you count to 8 and then you need to know when to do your hands and you need to do, and I was like, wow, Lucas, this is absolutely amazing. You know, I could run a workshop. Even an example this morning, when I've been preparing for a school workshop this afternoon, I've had to know and calculate how many quantities I need of everything. Nothing works without maths. I was lucky enough to actually be involved in a Heritage Open Day, at a wonderful place called Busborough Mill, based in Barnsley. And we were making pulleys and we were making water wheels. None of that worked without maths, even from just having to use a ruler to measure pieces of string to create a pulley. Nothing will work without maths. So to me, maths is part of the whole curriculum. I'm also a national numeracy champion as well. So that's where we're on a bit of a mission as well, to make people really understand the importance of maths. But again, sadly, people are so turned off from
Mm.
the subject. So again, that's why. So again, if I use that example of like exploding rainbows, you might look at that originally and say, well, that's teaching chemistry and science. Yes, but you need to make sure you know how many colours are in the rainbow. So that involves counting. We need to know how many different pots we need. We need to measure the volume of liquid that we need to make the explosions. We might want to measure that volume of gas that's being produced. So to me, maths is absolutely everywhere. And since I became a national numeracy champion, it's opened my eyes even further to it. I can't really do anything now. It's a bit like the Matrix, without seeing what the links to maths are.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we do a segment on the podcast which is all about the maths of life. And if I wasn't already thinking of maths everywhere, I'm thinking about it constantly now, because everywhere I'm looking, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I could use that in the podcast. So do you think then, I think maybe that there's a bit of an argument for saying it's potentially a teacher subject knowledge thing about recognizing when we're linking maths and science and other subjects together as well. I'll take the example from some of the great practice that we see in early years, where the skill really of the practitioner in early years, amongst other things, is recognizing those opportunities to make explicit the links to maths, and ask questions that perhaps elicit a little more thinking around the math side of things, whilst the children are interacting with the continuous provision and that sort of thing. So do you think within science lessons, or within just topic activities, or however you want to badge them in primary school particularly, it's about recognizing those opportunities, as you say, and spotting where the maths
Yeah.
is?
Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree. And it's having those, those team discussions and that collaboration as well in the way that those lessons are taught, or having that moment of reflection and looking back and saying, right, where did we actually miss those opportunities to teach maths? Because then I think it becomes a lot more natural
Yeah.
to looking for those opportunities. So no, I completely agree. There are opportunities for maths in everything that we do. It's the same with like the STEM subjects. I love that challenge of somebody approaching us with a topic, and they'll say, "Oh, don't know how we can link this," and I'm like, "Right, leave it with me," and then I will go through. But I really enjoy the challenge of doing that, and I quite like that hidden learning as well. Another example might be making simple levers and catapults. What a fun activity. You can make it, with some elastic bands, lollipop sticks, a spoon. You can have that ownership of a catapult by designing them. I've had, a footballer catapult, a zebra, a Spider-Man. That child is then really, really proud of that catapult they've made. But then we're using angles, with firing pom-poms from the catapult just into simple cups. Oh, we now need to calculate what score we've got, who's the winning team. Let's create a table of results. Now, perhaps if I'd gone in initially and just said, "Oh, right, kids, we're going to do maths for the next hour," they might be a bit like, I don't want them to feel like that, but sometimes that's reality.
Yeah.
We'll go into that classroom and say, "Right, come on, we're making catapults. Who's going to be at the top of the leaderboard? How many pom-poms can we fire over there?" It then creates such a buzz and excitement. And then from there, we'll then explain all the maths that was involved. Again, I've been very lucky. I have had quite a varied career, all links, because it all links to STEM and STEAM subjects. But I've had very practical jobs where out in the real world, they link so closely. Like I say, we couldn't work in veterinary practice without knowing the maths and the science of everything. You couldn't have done one standalone without the other. Everything needed to interlink for it to work.
That makes perfect sense, and it's great to hear how passionate you are about it as well, Leonie. I can imagine being in one of your sessions. It just sounds like fun, and that's what we want, education to be generally, don't we? Just thinking about the practicalities for primary teachers and primary leaders, we know that in the majority of primary schools now, not all, but many, maths is taught following a scheme. There's lots of schemes out there, and it tends to be a teaching for mastery approach, in so much as units are taught. You might do a couple of, maybe 3 weeks on multiplication, 3 weeks on division, 3 weeks or 2 weeks on measurement. I just want to touch on something you mentioned there about thinking about the planning science and technology alongside planning maths. I think is quite important to take into account when we're thinking about what skills we've covered in maths, and looking back to the previous year's teaching of maths as well, to see what can be built upon so that you can make explicit those links between what you're doing in science or technology and what the children already know from their maths lessons.
Oh, definitely. And also, I do completely understand that it's not as easy for everybody to, I suppose, go off script um, in a way and make all these lessons really practical. I'm not saying every single lesson would need to be practical. I just really enjoy that learning being memorable. And again, perhaps I've been incredibly lucky that I have had the opportunity from an educational setting to work in teams where, the I've worked alongside the art department, the technology department, the maths department, the science department, and we've tried to make sure that our teaching is all in sync.
Yeah.
I even had it where I worked with the art department where this doesn't directly link to maths, but in a way it does, but in terms of biology, where we were learning about the heart, but actually they did it as an art project as well, and the anatomical drawings while we were teaching that side in science. So I am a very strong believer because again, I believe when you go out into that big wide world of a career, like I was saying, everything interweaves. They do
Yeah.
not stand alone. So if we're able to teach as well, and I'm again big believer of getting all these subjects in as young as possible. I was in a nursery last week. It was absolutely wonderful, trying to get people engaged and excited by these subjects. That I think that will help people as they move for education and they go into careers because they're already starting to see those links and how everything comes together.
I totally agree, and I think in lots of ways, other subjects outside of maths are more readily linked together in primary schools, particularly. So I think back to some of the topics that we did when I was teaching in year six. One of them was about the heart, as it happens. So we would do some art around the heart. We would some of our English was linked to poetry and a book about a child who'd had a heart transplant and things. We used to get in sheep's hearts, lamb's hearts, and have a go at dissecting them. Not necessarily, we didn't. We used scissors and things, but
Yeah,
getting hands on and practical. And some of the children had to go and sit outside because because
exactly.
but all those things about the experience of that sort of memory. But we would also fill the chambers of the heart with liquid and see how much the volume of the liquid that was in there. We'd do simple measurements around the heart. We'd look at the circumference of things, and it was all maths. There was so much maths in there as well as the other subjects. But I just think sometimes those links aren't necessarily made as explicit
Mm,
in those subjects as they would be if you were doing this in a maths lesson.
yeah.
So just raising the profile of the fact that these subjects are interlinked for the pupils' benefit, so that they see that actually, oh yeah, all that stuff that we did last year in when we were measuring in maths, I'm using it now. I think sometimes potentially that could be lost.
Yeah, oh, I agree. And again, and I'm probably in quite a privileged position because I run like a STEAM, educational resource company. That is what I do every day. I'm writing educational projects that link, especially all the STEAM subjects together. So when we're planning, we quite often need to ensure for that project that we are hitting all of those markers. So I suppose perhaps we do have that bit more of a luxury in those projects that we can spend that little bit more time making sure that everything does link so nicely. But then again, I think it then becomes a way of teaching, a way of doing things. Everything is so much better and everything's so memorable. I had a lovely parent contact me last week, and don't get me wrong, their child goes to a wonderful school. I love working with them, but the parent actually took the time to say, "Do you know what? My little boy comes home from school and he never tells us what he's done. We never know. We can't get out of him." She says, "He spent the afternoon with you. We couldn't shut him up." She says, "I know
Yeah,
exactly what he did at school." She says, "I just had to contact you because I thought it was so nice that normally come home from school, nothing. What have you been doing today?" "Oh, I don't know, nothing." She says, "And he came home and he could tell us everything about what he'd done during this AmazeLab workshop." And I thought that was so like heartfelt, and it was really made us, you have those moments where you think, no, what we're doing is really, really good because we're creating that memorable learning. Then you can then build on those strands and those threads of learning. You think, right, how does that then link to this year? How does that link to, how can I then carry it forward? Because to me, it is a whole
Yeah.
learning journey. It shouldn't be segmented. We need to make sure that it's all being blended together.
And I know full well that if I was listening to this when I was in the classroom, which I was until Easter this year, that I'd be sitting there thinking, you rightly, only it all sounds amazing. I want to do all these wonderful things, but we've also got to cover everything in the curriculum. And, I get one afternoon of PPA a week, but in that time I've got to do X, Y, and Z as well. And I just don't have the time to, plan all these amazing activities. We know that there's lots of amazing. I think sometimes teachers don't recognize the wonderful things that they do,
Yeah.
actually, especially if you're in a classroom that you've been in for several years, or a year group that you've been in for several years, and you've done the same thing several times. You stop seeing the
Yeah.
wonder in that sometimes, but the children, it's the first time they've seen it, and they still love doing it. You must have the same thing sometimes with some of the workshops that you run. Um, I, Creating those memorable occasions, though, can take time, content, and can take a effort that maybe not everybody has that time to put in.
Oh,
Are there any? Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I agree, because we've all been there. That's why we try to make it that it is really simple things that you could grab out of the cupboard, that you can look
Yeah.
at. Again, we do quite a lot of teacher training and curriculum planning, and sometimes you just need to sit down with that other person. I'm exactly the same. Like I said about my mini AmazeLab crew, we had a brilliant moment where we were teaching chromatography, separating out inks, and I was trying to describe how you needed to fold the chromatography filter paper. It was a circle, and they just couldn't quite get it. And a 7-year-old said to me, "Miss, why didn't you just say you fold it like a taco?" Well, I'll use that in all my teaching now. I say that,
Yeah.
30 kids just do it. Amazing. So I'd not seen that. I needed that amazing 7-year-old to come up with that brilliant idea. Sometimes I'll be halfway through doing stuff and I think, I could have done that better doing it this way. Why did I not see that? But sometimes it's only when you've done it a few times or you're working with another group of young people that I think, oh, that would be laser better, change that. So yeah, I think it is sometimes, like I say, when we go in, sometimes we'll go into a school and the teachers will bring their problems. So they'll bring an issue, in the curriculum that they're struggling to teach or they don't really like. And then we will sit down and try and come up with a really simple way of making that easier, but for everybody. Because we don't want to add, educators are absolutely amazing, absolutely brilliant things are happening every day in our classrooms. They are such wonderful people. And even as a parent, I am so, so grateful for that. So we don't want to add any stress onto that. The idea is that we're using really simple effective things. Like I was saying about the catapults and teaching multiplication, you can do that with some lollipop sticks, a spoon, and some elastic bands. You can pick them up on your supermarket shop. You might even just be able to put them through the order at school. They might be hiding in a cupboard. But you can have loads and loads of fun. And I really like projects where the young people can take something home, because I want that learning to continue at home. So to me, the joy, again, using that example of the catapults and pom-poms, that they will go home and then they will teach everybody at home that maths game and get everybody involved, is what I'm aiming for, really. I don't just want that learning to stop in the classroom. I want it to continue for years to come. And then hopefully, they might be then in my position in a few years and they go, "Oh, do you remember when we did that catapult lesson?" That's what we're aiming for, really. But really simple, does not have to be complicated at all, and hopefully could be used across like a whole year group as well.
No, and I think sometimes we can be guilty, can't we, of thinking of science as something that we did at secondary school with Bunsen burners, and actually, much like math, science is all around us and explains how the world works, and the world wouldn't work very well without those principles that you find in any science lesson. It's been fantastic talking to you, Leonie. I absolutely love the conversation that we've had this morning, and your passion for all things STEAM has definitely come through in our conversation. Could you tell me, just before we finish, could you tell me a little bit more about the National Numeracy ambassador role that you've
Yeah. So
you've
yeah, if people are just able to Google, National Numeracy Champions. On that website, there's a number of free resources. There's really good videos from such positive role models, people who've struggled with maths, people who have now, found ways to make it easier and integrate it into their everyday lives. There's like National Numeracy Day, National Numeracy Week. Again, we've just been invited to do a feature about how we make maths really fun, and like I said, there's hidden ways of doing maths to make people realize how important it is. So so in that role, again, we get together every couple of months, and basically it's just a big discussion of how we have been using maths. And it's a big like group share of ideas and resources, but people can sign up to be a National Numeracy Champion if they just Google it, or please do get in touch and I'll happily provide all of the information. So again, in that role, it is just trying to promote numeracy and maths, and again, break down those barriers to learning and try remove when sadly some people are slightly scared by those subjects. That's what we're trying to remove. We're trying to make numeracy a much more positive experience.
There's some fantastic work that goes on with the team there at the National Numeracy. So, you did mention that we could get in touch with you. What's the best way to get in touch, Leonie, if people want to know a little bit more?
Oh yeah, obviously if you look for a rainbow conical flask, you'll find AmazeLab. If you pop AmazeLab into a search engine, so we're across like all social media, or please do drop us an email. It's info@amazelab.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you.
And I will put that into the show notes as well. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Leonie. Really appreciate it. I know the listeners will take a heap from it as well. And it's been great to talk to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.